I like to think of it instead of like as an artist, how did you get started thinking creatively or creative problem solving? And I think that a lot of it had to do with growing up on the farm. My mom would always say, you know, kids have to get bored before they get creative. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I also had some time for creativity when she was taking care of my younger sisters. So I would sort of go out to my dad's shop and borrow some tools or some cans of spray paint and go in places of the barn that weren't really paid attention to and experiment a little bit with the spray paint. You know, only years later, after stacks of hay or straw were moved, they'd find these sort of little murals that were painted. My grandma on my mother's side was a very creative thinker, and you know, we would visit her, and she lived about 2.5 hours from my parents, but we would go visit and stay with her for several days, and she'd have all kinds of craft projects and things for us to do, and she would always be doing something with her hands. There might be a baseball game or something on TV they'd be watching, and she'd be sitting there crocheting or knitting and not even looking at what she was doing, just like doing it in front of the TV. She was such a creative thinker, and she was such a wonderful, encouraging person to have in my life growing up as a creative person. And I had a great art teacher in grade school. She was young and energetic and had all kinds of ideas, and we did some pretty challenging ideas for young kids. So I was lucky to have a series of great art teachers, grade school, middle school, and high school. I was really hungry for that knowledge. I just stayed really dedicated to that program the whole time we were in high school. The gallery at 212 Art Center is called Observations. I called the show Observations because I feel like as an artist you spend a lot of time really observing your surroundings. And not just that, but observing what it is that interests you about those surroundings. They're mostly landscapes. There are some flowers. I have a flower room. I've loved painting flowers for years, but I also just recently in the last couple of years started painting landscapes again. 2 years ago, I did an artist residency at a national park, and I had it in my sights to do an artist residency. 6 years ago, I homeschooled my kids and traveled around the country and camped in national parks. Got to see some of the art collections that the parks have. So when an artist is an artist in resident, many times they will donate a piece back to the park, and so the park has these collections of really beautiful pieces. So I thought, oh, that'd be a really great thing to do. It'll be a gift to myself when I get my son through high school, right? And so that year that he was a senior, I started applying to places. And the one I ended up going to was in Nebraska. I'd never been to Nebraska, and I was just like, okay, let's give it a shot, you know? And so 2-day drive out there. The people were great. I got to the Homestead National Monument, and it's an original homesteader's farm. You know, I arrive out there, I meet the ranger who's my contact person, and I said, I'm just checking in with you to see what your expectations are while I'm here. I want to make sure that I'm on the same page. And she goes, you just get to do what you want. And it'd been like, you know, I said I just graduated my son from high school, which was a struggle. I was like, I haven't had time in years to just do what I want, you know? It was great. At first it was slightly paralyzing, and then I hit the ground running, and I think I cranked out about 20 paintings in 2 weeks. It just pushed me into jumping back into painting watercolors in the national parks. I have such a fond place in my heart for national parks. The problem-solving part is the part that keeps me coming back. I love when I come up with an idea and I think, okay, well, how would I make that happen? So I use my sketchbook quite a bit in the initial problem-solving stages. Sketch ideas, write down possible solutions, and you know, in sculpture, that's a different mode of problem-solving than in painting. You know, if I decide I'm going to do some landscape painting, for instance, you know, deciding where am I going to put the horizon line? Do I, you know, oh, the clouds are magnificent, so I want to do a vertical piece where I have lots of clouds in there, or that horizon line is really beautiful and there's some great color contrast between the wheat field and the cornfield, you know, so the problem-solving part is really exciting. And I think as I've gotten older as an artist, I've become more patient with that and come up with better solutions and paid more attention to details. So there is a piece that I feel had a bigger challenge to solve. Well, I recently took a workshop in Indiana at this place called the Art Barn, which was a super cool place. The workshop was with this guy named Leon Zhen, and so there were 2 pieces in the show. One I did at the workshop, a couple that I did when I got back using some of his techniques and my technique and work methods. And the one in the show that I did in that class was a painting of koi fish, but this painting, he had us use only 3 colors. And I always tell my students, you can get everything from 3 colors, right? Red, yellow, and blue. But this was a really good taste of my own medicine, this class, because we had a little pool of blue, little pool of red, and a little pool of yellow. And we only used those. And we'd flip splatter paint on it, and then we'd go in with our hands, and we'd sort of move the paint around and make it turn into something. So it would just look like a bunch of colors. And then you'd come back after it dries some and go in and add those fish. And so it was blowing the lid off of loosening up and adding more color, and it was a great workshop. So I think that piece sort of represents definitely a new way of thinking. And how do I structurally go through a piece and decide that it's finished, or make it happen that it's finished? That's a tough thing, and it's always been tough with my students. It's almost easier if you have an instructor standing over your shoulder saying, stop right there, it's perfect, right? Because when you're doing the painting, you're so emotionally connected to the outcome. One of the things I always tell my students, and I've had great students that I've taught at 212 Art Center, is to loosen up, not care so much about your outcome, just loosen up and use more color. Push yourself. If this painting starts out and it's bad, is it gonna get worse? So who cares? Just keep going and see what you can learn from it, But I think when I paint, one of the things that helps me figure out when it's finished is I make sure I put it up and walk away. Maybe go get a drink of water, whatever, come back in 10 minutes and take a look and look at it with fresh eyes. And I really think that stepping back and looking at it with fresh eyes is so important. You just see stuff that you wouldn't have noticed before. I really try to paint like I don't care. I don't care what's going to happen in the end. I'm just going to do this and see what happens. I have a good friend, Martha Keller, who is a phenomenal painter. And it was a workshop and we were painting. And just to watch her brush almost danced on the surface of the paper or the canvas or whatever we were painting on, to make sure you hold on to some of that joy while you're painting and not put all this pressure for this outcome to be, perfect, I think is important to keep in mind. Yeah.